Maybe one thing about love that's important, I think, is that it's not a scarcity thing. It's not less. The more you love, it's more. It makes more. And it's because you're continually in relation, and it'll be difficult, unavoidably. And that's part of it. But it's not something that there is a scarcity of, ever. They're all one thing, and then from that one thing, we can talk about thinking and we can talk about feeling. But it comes from one thing, which to me is sense-making as a living being. It's, what you need, what you do in order to keep living. And it's very, very basic and biological. It's like total basic needs, and that's sense-making. And then later on, as humans, once we grow up, then we start to realize, oh, this is thinking and this is feeling, but they are never really actually separate. But we can talk about them like that, and we can then experience them like that. And we can do such intricate thinking about them. And that really actually fascinates me, that from this one thing that sense-making is, which is what every living being does, even the trees, we can then have this really sophisticated talking about thinking and thinking in sophisticated ways. And so I was studying cognitive science at Sussex, and I was interested in social cognition. And from cognitive science, we think about the individual and individual brains and individual behavior. And at Sussex, individual embodiment, which was really cool to think about that and to be in the Center for Computational Neuroscience and Robotics, where they were making robots, and like thinking about embodiment through robots and so on. But it was very individualistic. And I thought we also have to think through sociology to understand intersubjectivity. And sociology was mainly thinking about interaction, but cognitive science and sociology weren't really talking to each other much. And so there needed to be a bridge built there. And so I did sort of design or think of participatory sense-making also to make that bridge between the cognitive sciences and the social sciences, because together they can really think about intersubjectivity. My dad comes from, the dialect that people speak there ostensibly doesn't have a word for love or loving, supposedly. But they do say it, but not very much. And I would not say that loving is a feeling. Loving is relating. Loving is a living relating. Existential means that from the particular being that each of us is, you with your particular body and situation and history and wovenness into where you are, love particular things because of the particular being you are. Yeah, so someone who loves you can notice something about you by which you get to know yourself better.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Love and Philosophy. Do loving and knowing share their core? That's the way my guest, the philosopher of cognitive science, Hanne De Jaegher, puts it in her wonderful Loving and Knowing, Reflections for an Engaged Epistemology, which we begin to talk about here just barely, more through personal experience, because it's very rich and there's so much to unpack, and it's only the tip of Hanne's amazing body of work, which you've probably heard me talk about here. And if you listen to the last podcast with Ezekiel DePaulo, you also heard about some of these ideas relative to 4E cognition, 4 with an E, and especially embodied and inactive, which is 2 of the E's there. Also participatory sense-making. All of these words have come up in other podcasts, so you're probably starting to recognize them now. Hanne obtained her PhD in the philosophy of cognitive science in 2007. She was supervised by Andy Clark at the University of Sussex. Andy Clark's one of those philosophers you might have heard of. He's an interesting person who might be a good path into this 4E cognition if you're still wondering what that is. Hanne's dissertation was Social Interaction, Rhythm, and Participatory Sense-making, an embodied interactional approach to social understanding with implications for autism. So a lot of those words in her dissertation have been work that she's expanded on since then. And of course, the world has changed a lot since 2007, and a lot of the ideas in her thesis and a lot of what she's been thinking of as a kid, as you will hear her say in this podcast, have become more and more important, or at least people have started to focus on them more over these years, especially in philosophy. So ideas of intersubjectivity, for example, and individual and interactional autonomy, but also neurodivergence, all these different ways that there are of being in the world. Hanne's work has looked at that for a long time, but she's also been thinking about it in different ways for her whole life. What does it mean to think differently than those around you? It's something she knows very well, as you'll hear her talk about in this podcast, and it's something we explore together here as a way of beginning to open up this very rich world of philosophy that I know a lot of you are just discovering for the first time. This is a sort of crucial idea that comes up a lot in the comments or the emails that I get around this podcast of people wanting to sort of take this idea that love is important, that caring matters, and deepen it, understand how hard it is and how tense it is, and, that it's not this rom-com notion, and that there's a whole philosophy of understanding that can help us with what it means to be relating in the world. So a lot of people are really interested in that, but then I hear them say, well, okay, but aren't people going to take advantage of us if we think that feeling and caring and all of these things you talk about, Andrea, are really important? I have a lot to say about that, and this is not the place for that, but it is a place to realize that we're not in an either-or situation here. And what all of this is really doing, as Hanne's work shows, is opening a different capacity for self and for how all those potentials, such as being ashamed or being taken advantage of, actually co-relate in the constellation of one's life, but also in our societies and in our education and in our families and in our places of work. We're at a point now where all of that is changing, and we can rethink and relive into and reimagine what's possible. We talk about a lot of subjects around that here, about how important it is to realize that difference is part of the world, as Hanne says here. She tried to talk about that with the Dalai Lama, and as you'll hear, it was not an easy thing to discuss because it's hard to understand that we are all part of one process, one ongoing process, and there are differences. This is the thing we have to hold. Both of these are true. So I guess what we're trying to do here in this conversation is talk about love as exasperating in a way. It's something that requires persistence, something that does bring you up against those possibilities of embarrassment or hurt, but that it's actually by learning to sit with that this other way of being in the world might open up. And that relates to other conversations we've had here about even just in our work life, how hard it is to live into this space, even if we understand or we felt that this is a completely different quality of life and of interaction, and that it's like a portal that we could move through. At the same time, everyday life just really makes it hard to hold that. That's part of what systems theory is, or systems thinking, moving into an understanding that's kaleidoscopic or a constellation instead of this either or way of judgment or of comparison that all of us have felt and are still feeling, and that frankly is just really hard to deal with. If you really think about how much of the world runs on us trying not to be embarrassed or judged or being afraid of that, it's interesting to think of that and think about what might happen if we don't have to work in a system which is powered by that. What would that mean? Because it's definitely possible. But just to talk to some of you about why should we do this? Why does it matter? And are we going to be taken advantage of if we're people who care and love? No, you're not. Not if you really dig into it in the way we're trying to open up here, because it's an agency. It's an expansion of agency, because it's an expansion of how you understand what you are and how you are connected to the world. You're not a lone being stuck in your head who has to be compared and judged by and with everything around it. That's the old way of thinking about it. But this conversation with Hanne, which is going to get into all of that in a different way, and many of the other conversations are one way to break out of that. So it's not about losing your agency and being passive in all of this. You can be soft and you can be strong. You can be flexible and you can be persistent. One thing we talk about here, which I especially want to highlight a little bit, is how just noticing another person, noticing the people around you without sort of judgment, just noticing who they are. That's an act of loving, and it's also knowing at a level that's beyond what many people have felt is possible, mostly because of all this judging that goes on and this trying to avoid embarrassment and this trying to look like we're happy and the optics. But there's actually this loving and this knowing that's just the kind of the beating heart of why we want to be alive and what matters. And it comes from just being able to notice and sit with and appreciate, I guess, another being, or to be in the space of someone who's doing that for you. And that can be a dog or a cat or a tree or however you define a being, nature. It's a good way to start, actually, if it's hard for you with humans. Even Anna here talks about walking with the trees. There's really something about it, and it's not silly or woo or anything like that. It's just there's literal life all around you, and noticing it actually is a step into a different way of being sometimes. And it is a kind of portal that opens us into other ways of experiencing the world. And that's where this loving and knowing, these two words, are so close. Holding the space of presence with another being, the amazing possibility that we can actually do that we can actually be aware of another person. That's not a sweet, easy thing all the time. But that it's possible, that's such a simple thing and such a powerful thing and such a difficult thing. And that's what I wish for you, wherever you are, that you are able to sit in that place and notice someone and be noticed by someone, maybe even by yourself. We can also notice ourselves without judgment, and that you don't think of that as some sentimental, gooey thing, that you don't try to lock it away or make it into a product, but just that you feel it, and in feeling it, you feel some real power, which will start unlocking some other portals in your life and in what is possible. All right, that's enough of my rambling on. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Hanne De Jaegher, and that you'll have a look at some of her work. Be well, have fun. Okay, hello Hanne. Thank you so much for being here today. It's a real honor to have you on Love and Philosophy.
Thank you, Andrea, for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here.
I want to start with two words, knowing and loving, which are very important in your work. But I thought maybe we could let those words just sort of hang in the air a little bit and frame the conversation. But I wanted to start actually with your memory. If you have a memory of the first time you realized that you were thinking, or that there was such thing as thinking, do you have any memories about that? Or
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, it's funny that you asked me that question, because it's kind of significant in my life actually. When I, or somehow, I don't know if it's the first time that I realized about thinking, but I remember, especially driving in the car with my parents when I was maybe 5 or 6, and sitting in the middle between, so leaning in between their seats. It was before we had to wear seatbelts. Mm. And my mom sometimes still tells that I would always say, you know what I think? And then we would start this philosophical conversation, or a conversation just about, thinking or phenomena, or, I wouldn't have called it phenomena. I don't actually remember what the topics were precisely, but probably things we saw and so on. And my mom and dad told me that later on still, that they used to call me, I think, I believe, because I would open conversations with them. You know what I think? You know what I believe? And then we would, have philosophical conversation. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think, I think that was kind of formative, and it sort of, it expressed or was something that came from before and still continues now, I think, in my life. Yeah. That to sort of ponder, I guess.
ponder, that's a good word. I think I believe. I wonder where those words came from. Did your parents use them a lot? 5 or 6 years old is pretty young to be so aware of those words. Or is it?
I don't actually know whether it is young or not. I don't. But my dad was a psychologist, and my mom, she taught people literacy, and also she became a care worker for autistic people and autistic families, autistic children. And yeah, so I think probably my parents spoke like that. I think those words were not in any way absent, or they were very present in our world, I think, because of the professions of my parents. And my dad was also studying in the mid-80s or late 80s, when I was about 8 to 10. He was studying systemic therapy, at a place far away from, within Belgium, far away from where we live. And so it was an event that he went to that place to study those things, and then he came back and talked about it over dinner. And so, I mean, systems and systemic therapy and systemic thinking, even Gorilla's work, that was present when I was quite young, just around the dinner table. And then there was also, this was really maybe funny. There is a kind of story that was recorded on a vinyl record that we played at home, and it's a story from a Dutch couple of storytellers and singers, and it was about a story about systems and the systems, and they were sort of creatures in the forest. And it was I don't remember what the story was precisely, but like a normal children's story. But some of the creatures were called systems. And I remember when we were driving one holiday, long drives, that I imagined that the pylons that you see next to the highway were the systems. And yeah, I mean,
I wish we could find that song. I wonder if there's any way, because I have never heard about a song that where the systems are the creatures. And I'm trying to imagine being this child in your household, because, of course, Francisco Varela, systems thinking, these things that you've mentioned are so important to your work now. And that's amazing that that was already in your life. And I'm wondering, were you in a community where a lot of people were talking and thinking about this? I know it was normal for you as a child, but as you grew older, did you realize that was a special environment that you were in to be learning about those things so young?
yeah, I think, of course, because of the profession of my father, he as a psychologist and then learning about these things. He later on specialized in autism and systemic therapy. And before that, he was very politically engaged at university. But that was before I was in the picture. So, and of course, their friends were also the people that he was an activist with, and the people that their colleagues and so on. We must have also been people who talked a lot about these things. And still, my mom is still friends with some of those people. And my dad died 9 years ago, so that's why he's in the past. My mom's still in the present. So yeah, I didn't experience so much a community. I know you were maybe thinking about something like Lindisfarne or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, or just
Which we like that. It was just my parents' friends and colleagues, but we didn't sort of live together or anything like that. They were in the vicinity and we met them, but we didn't live in a community like that. But yeah, and later on, of course, when I started to learn that something like philosophy exists in my team, then that really opened a whole new world again. And that was like, oh gosh, that's my thing. I felt really attracted to that, of course. And it's very clear that not everybody in my school was, for instance, or every time I made a transition in school, my mom told me, you will meet more people who are like you now. When I went from primary school to secondary school, she was like, now you will meet more of your people, or you will finally meet your people, actually, maybe. And in secondary school, that happened a little bit. And then when I went to university, that happened again more because I went to study philosophy. And then that really happened in a way. Yeah. But it was really nice, actually, that my mom saw that, that I needed that it wasn't there, and that in this transition, it would potentially open up more, that there would be more people like me who were interested in thinking and in philosophy and in even abstraction or a different kind of connecting to the world, maybe.
Did you notice that about yourself? The other word was loving, and it sounds like you had very loving family, or you loved your family very much. Do you have a sense of when you started thinking about that word? Were you young when you thought of that too?
Well, the loving thing is a bit, maybe that's kind of stranger in a way, I think. I mean, I've been thinking about it recently because in some ways it's really funny, but in the place where my dad comes from, I've thought about this quite a lot for a long time, because where my dad comes from, the dialect that people speak there ostensibly doesn't have a word for love or loving. And
Is that Belgium? Is that Flemish, or is that
in Flemish? So in Eastern Flanders, that's where my dad comes from. They don't have a word for loving, and supposedly. But they do say it, but not very much. And actually, people in Belgium in general don't say it so much compared to where I live now in Canada, where this, when we phone family, we always end with saying "I love you," and my husband and I say that to each other many times a day. And I love that now, but when I was young, I had a sort of aesthetic idea that saying that is not done, or that you only say that when you really, really deeply mean it. And I think that comes in part from this place where my dad comes from, where there is no word for loving. And when people do say something like it, they say something like, translated would be, "I like to see you," which I actually think is a very loving thing to say, because liking to see someone is actually very intimate and very. Um, so in Flemish, it would be "ik zie u graag." And I actually think that's very special. It's aesthetic. There's a kind of reticence in it as well, maybe a distance as well as the closeness, right? So there was that element. But then where my mom comes from was the province within Belgium that was where the people were considered, or it's like a stereotype, but people were considered the soft ones within the range of, the provinces in Belgium are kind of, in the Flanders at least, are like from the soft spoken ones, or the more soft hearted ones, that where my mom comes from and where we ended up living, and more towards the west, where people are thought to be harder and more, maybe not so, dealing with love in the same way, or so close to loving, or so, I don't know. So those two things sort of came together in me and where I lived and so on. But then there was also when, until my maybe mid-20s or 30s, that I really thought that saying "I love you" is something that you only do when you really, truly, deeply believe it. And I actually now think that's a bit strange, because, yeah, in a way also you can never be sure. I mean, that was sort of treating love as something absolute, perhaps, which I don't think is the case anymore. I don't believe anymore that love is something so absolute. It's much more shifting and moving, and something that we, in a way, always work on to do and, engage in. And we must keep on engaging in it. And this must keep on engaging in it is at the same time not really a choice, because as living beings, that is what we do. We relate to the world in that way, I think. I think loving is a relating to the world that living beings do because they are alive, but also must do to have a good relation with the world in a way, or to keep living. Yeah.
Yeah, this is fascinating, because in your work, Loving and Knowing, you talk about both as a kind of relation, different. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, I come from a place where it's the opposite of what you described, of where you say "I love you" all the time, and I grew up being told that, sort of where you are now. And I've flipped, right? Now I have a Dutch husband, and who on you, and I've thought about it from the other way around than you just described. And also living in Berlin a long time, where it's a lot more normal to come at it the way you just expressed it. At least there's something that's happened that's different when I'm an adult and I choose to say it from a different place. But there's something about this movement of knowing and loving, where when you become aware of, when you notice the person or the relationship in a different way, the way that you love and know, the way that you relate, does it deepen, or does it, I know that's very messy, but I'm trying to get into this distinction we tend to make between feelings and thinking, and how at some point these are actually relations.
Yeah, I think when you said that feeling and thinking are that they are different, actually to me that doesn't make sense anymore. I think they're the same, or they're all one thing, and then from that one thing we can talk about thinking and we can talk about feeling, but it comes from one thing, which to me is sense making as a living being. It's what you need, what you do in order to keep living. And it's very, very basic and biological. It's like total basic needs, and that's sense making. And then later on, as humans, once we grow up, or then we start to realize, oh, this is thinking and this is feeling, but they are never really actually separate. But we can talk about them like that, and we can then experience them like that, and we can Yeah, and we can do such intricate thinking about them. And that really actually fascinates me, that from this one thing that sense making is, which is what every living being does, even the trees, and we can then have this really sophisticated talking about thinking and thinking in sophisticated ways. And yeah, I find that really.
Yeah, you say loving and knowing share a core, or they entail each other. That's actually very profound. What you just said, I think, can seem hard to grasp if we're thinking of what thinking and knowledge is as something in the head, which I think is still an assumption most of us maybe have, and loving is in the body and it's feeling.
Mhm.
So what you just said is almost like a completely different way of understanding what we are. Not only, I mean, I want to say it's a different epistemology, but that already fits it into that old way of thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do think it's an ontology, actually. I think it's an ontologically different thing. Yeah. And when you were just speaking, I had a thought about it that could help maybe explain it or something, but, or maybe, I don't know whether it's always about explaining it either. Maybe that's also, I mean, yes, of course, as scientists, we want to explain and we do explaining, and that's important. And it leads to insight and to progress and all that. But I also think there's maybe some element of it that we don't really understand, but still feel in our body or have in our body. And as bodily beings, we live like that. We live that. And that in a way remains maybe mysterious to our thoughts or to our thinking. But that also relates, the thinking and the bodily living, the going out to what we need for living, like some tea. Does that help me think now? Maybe. Yeah, like, yeah. So it is a different way of thinking about these things and a different way of being, which is also, in a way, that's something I'm learning myself still through thinking this, which is then a funny movement, right? To think it's a different ontology, but I come to that through thinking as well, and then through recognizing that being is actually like that, is a relating. So loving and I would not say that loving is a feeling. Loving is relating. Loving is a living relating. It's an existential relating. When existential means that from the particular being that each of us is, you with your particular body and situation and history and wovenness into where you are, love particular things because of the particular being you are, and everybody loves particular specific things, and that's different for all of us because of the particular beings we are, and that's our existence then. As this particular material being means that we go out to certain things and we don't go out and search out other things. So it makes differentiations in the world, this loving or this living relating. And that's where distinctions then start to happen in the world. So I want and like this, or I need to avoid that, or a whole bunch of things is actually irrelevant to me and I don't notice it unless something changes in me or in the relation or the world calls to me in a different way. But those distinctions then start to be made. And then we start to see different things and different categories come into being, and also the difference between, or a difference between thinking and feeling comes into being. And from that, maybe some people call it oneness. I don't know if that's the right word. That's has some Buddhist history, which I'm not a Buddhist expert in any way. So, but I do relate to that sense of oneness out of which we come, and within which then also distinctions and differentiations are made and are present, which we then also have to deal with. But yeah, I definitely do think it's ontological, not just epistemological.
Well, maybe you'll go into this in a way with me that's messy, because I mean, I feel like what you're trying to do, what I think needs to be done, and believe me, I'm okay if you completely disagree and correct all of this, but it's a different way of understanding what it is to be a self, what it is to be alive, and we have to even throw up in the air all these ways we've been using language and find new ways to use it. So when you say ontology in philosophy, that's to do with the beingness, right? And then epistemology is supposed to be about the knowledge. But what we're saying here, I think, is that those aren't different. So, but they are. So there's
Yes.
this tension which runs through a lot of your work that we have to hold. And we can think of it through ontology or through epistemology, and those can't really be reconciled, but they're still part of this way that the body is relating with all that it encounters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that knowing and being and doing are all always intertwined. So it's not just knowing and being, it's also doing. And so as a living being, we cannot not move. Moving is for a living being is living. And so the doing constantly changes the world because we change, we do in a world. So we move, and when we move, things around us inevitably also move. And so we relate to that as living beings because we do, we need things for continuing living. That's inevitable, and it's an activity at the same time. And so that changes the world. And so, but we also relate to that changing the world because we have to sometimes act on something that we need not being there. And then we have to do something else to get it anyway. And that's hard. It's an effort. And so through that effort, I think, is when sense making becomes a little bit more specific generates or takes on some more specificity than just I need this and I don't need that. I need to make an effort to get what I need, and so then I need to do something else, and that extends time. So that's an idea also from Hans Jonas, from immediacy to immediacy, right? We can have immediate gratification or something like that, or immediate meeting of needs, but as a living being, that isn't always the case, and so there's more and more immediacy between what you need and getting it. So things aren't immediate anymore. There is an opening relation between what you need and how you get it. And in that opening relation, your meanings emerge that you then also again have to deal with to get the thing that you need. And that, I think, opens sense making and makes it more and more sophisticated and or more variegated. And so that opens up all these new ways of knowing. And at the same time, that changes how the world is. So it is ontology as well, in a way. I think like it is the being of the world that it's constantly changing. And we ourselves, this is one of the things that we're not used to thinking at all. Maybe the thing that we're least used to thinking is that we change as knowers constantly as we know. I think that's the most safeguarded element of Western epistemology, that we are these objective observers who are totally static. And what an injustice to ourselves that is. But so the doing, knowing, being, and doing, in a paper where they say we have a triangle. Of course, knowing, being, and doing are three basic elements of philosophy for so long. And they always are interrelated. So they move.
Are they only interrelated, or are they nested, and do they look different in relation depending on where we look at them from? I mean, can we even separate them except to talk about them? Do you really see them as like separate things, the knower, the doer, and the beer?
No, of course they're I think they're both the same and different from each other always.
Right.
And I think that's true with almost all things in the world. And maybe, there was, so some time ago I was with the Dalai Lama, we had a dialogue. And one of the things that he keeps saying is that we are all one and humanity is one, and that's such an important message. And I completely agree with that. And at the same time, and I couldn't really convey that, is because I asked him, isn't difference also part of the world? And he totally struck it off, but I think that it really is also part of the world, and we need to acknowledge that in order to work better on the idea that we are all one, or that we need each other as humanity. But the difference needs to be acknowledged as well. And so there also, that's true that knowing, being, and doing are the same and also different, because we live in a material world. And the material world isn't one of all sameness. It's one world in which different things emerge, and they change all the time. So all of that is true at the same time.
It could sound as if this is easy, but holding that tension and letting both be there without trying to smush them into each other, I think is so urgent right now, and I really feel it in your work, and so hard to even articulate because our language tries to do the either or thing. Like, for example, that's a really interesting story about being with the Dalai Lama, and I think there's been such a push about, oh, we're so different, everybody's so different, and then the pushback is, no, we're all one, we need to focus on what makes us similar. And it just, the whole conversation is like an either or of that, to where it almost becomes hard to realize what we're doing is zooming out to hold both of those. And that's the, whatever, the oneness or the pattern, but it actually holds what you just said. Do you understand what I mean? I find it very hard to really, really articulate that.
Yeah, but you said it. I think that's what it is, yeah. It's holding both oneness and difference at the same time. And also, I think what is crucial about holding it is that it's, so I said holding both oneness and difference at the same time, but this at the same time is actually an open time. It's not one time. Time or living is, every moment is different. And so that open, so that we can sometimes feel oneness and sometimes feel different, or sometimes oneness is more to the foreground and everything is one, or some things are the same. So with a lover or a husband or a child or a dog or pet, we can feel very close. That's the kind of love, but that's only one end of maybe a spectrum of love. And another element of love is that sometimes you feel really distant and really different, but you're still in a relationship, maybe even exasperated at how different you feel from the other and how you cannot reach them. But that's not outside of love. I think that's very much in love. And that is the form of relating that then, like every element in relation, requires a next moment or several next moments in order for the relationship to move to a different place. And so difference and oneness, both being true, is in a world where there is time and space for us to move. And moving in time and space is what we do to make sense of the world, because we move between being close and being far from each other, and needing each other, and needing to be alone, and needing to, come back to your own thinking. And so this is also what we are doing while we are talking, I think, and what often happens when we talk with other people, that you keep with your own thinking, but you also move to where the other is thinking, and you move in between those things. And that actually is also how we understand each other, that we do that movement from closeness to far away to what is going on, I don't understand, and then you make a next move in your thinking, or literal move in your walking around in the world. And
yeah, this tension, you talk about it sometimes as over-determining or under-determining, or also just being in a loving relationship, and like you were just describing, where you still want to maintain your autonomy or yourself, and at the same time you're part of this other ongoing being, which is the relationship. And what's the role of noticing that, or awareness of that helps with that? Because we've been talking about, like, when we were children, and then, at least in my experience, I feel like I was just so absorbed in the relating that I couldn't notice it. And as I grow, and as I read, and as I have conversations, and as I use language, I began to notice that these things are happening, and something about the awareness helps me at least move towards what we're talking about, being able to hold the tension. What do you see is the role of that noticing or awareness? Or
yeah, I think that's really important, actually. I think beginning to notice it makes it possible for us to open space and time more to do different things than we would have done if we hadn't noticed it. So becoming aware of these patterns, or of the tensions or the possibilities, means that we can do different things than we could do if we hadn't seen something of the dynamics. And we don't have to fully understand it immediately, and I don't think we can ever maybe fully understand it, but beginning to see it means, yeah, here there's an opening and I can do something different now than what I was used to, for instance. And also, it's not just only that. I think also, what you said earlier, that it's like a turning on its head, or a totally different ontology or understanding. that then puts everything in a different light, or makes things that seemed obvious now less obvious. And if something becomes less obvious, it means that you can see other things and move to other things and do other things.
You said an opening, and that I was thinking of this as almost like a portal to think about, for example, your mom saying to you, you're going to meet people more like you. There's a way in which the loving and the knowing, like she knew you, she loved you, she saw you, and she held the space of that, and kind of that loving opened up this portal for you to maybe notice it, maybe you already noticed it, I don't know, but there's something that we do for each other in relation that is also that opening, or we help each other hold the tension by modeling it for each other or something like that. I mean, when you think back to you being that little kid, obviously you're thinking a lot about what knowledge is, what thinking is. And do you see that your mom and your dad noticing that and taking it seriously for you helped you hold it? Was that a kind of loving that, this opening, that portal, or whatever I'm trying to talk about?
Yes, yeah. And so I think there are two levels of that. So one is noticing that explicitly and then being able to think about it. And the other one is noticing, like my mom said, that thing about meeting more of my people is more like a noticing of, oh yes, I wasn't actually with my people so far. And it's not just me that was, bullied or not feeling at home or feeling just like not at ease in school. It's like, yes, it's also because the other people couldn't relate to me very well. It wasn't just me not relating very well to them or not feeling at home. And that is the kind of noticing of an actual element that was really important. I mean, like how do you say that? Like a crucial thing in my life that really affected me a lot. And then that opened to something new with new possibilities. But that's one noticing that was immediately relevant to me, to how I was living my life and what impinged in me and how life in school impacted me. But then there's the noticing of that you can do that kind of noticing, and that then means that you can think differently, or that there's different like advancing way of thinking about what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm. It feels like that place where loving and knowing are the same. I mean, they're always a relation, but are manifesting. That feels loving to me. That your mom. That, I mean, it happens in many ways. A lot of people say some teacher notices something about them, and just happens to say it. It's one little comment like, "Oh, you're so good at drawing," or something, and it's just suddenly this whole world opens up, like the portal.
Yeah.
That feels very rich with this loving and knowing as you've expressed it in your work.
Yeah, I think that's true. So yes, this is something else I wanted to say about how you were saying it earlier. So someone who loves you can notice something about you by which you get to know yourself better. That can make a really big shift in your being, because it's being recognized then by someone who loves you, and then they show you something. The world can look different. You yourself can look different. You understand yourself better, and that again then opens new ways of moving for you in the world. And that changes the world effectively. Like, I did then meet more people who were closer to me and my being, and then I got real deep friends, and that's, the world became different because of that. But that's different from noticing the patterns, right? So that happens in a loving relationship where you see each other. So actually,
there's the seeing again.
Yeah, the people in my dad's province, or the dialect that he spoke, where they say "I love you," and the literal words are "I like to see you," and that is actually really important in loving relationships, that someone truly sees you. And it's not actually the literal translation; it's a bit hard to make in English. It's not just only "I like to see you." There's a word in it. It's graag. It's like I don't know really how to say that. It's something like seeing you is good. It's not so much I like to see you, but seeing you is good for me.
Mm-hmm.
In a way.
The relation is in there already.
Yeah, there is more relation in there maybe than it seems at first.
Yeah, and it feels very sensory. I mean, just from the Dutch and the German it feels very sensory. It's not just like I see you with my eyes. It's almost I feel you, but of course that's not the right word either in this context. But my body fills you, or so, I don't know. It's a holding. It's a holding.
It's a holding, yeah. The Trag or Gerne in German is like your body goes out to the other person.
That's
Yeah.
it. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me, you said it's not the pattern. I really want you to help me understand that better, because I feel like this noticing is a loving and a knowing. When our teachers do it, even when someone at the store just happens to see maybe you look sad and they hold the space for a second, and it changes your day. These are real moments of loving and knowing, which doesn't mean they know everything about you or they like love you in some romantic way, but that for me feels like noticing in the sense of just being aware of what is, which is not easy. But you said it's not noticing the patterns. I'd like to hear about that, and I also think it moves us. I mean, we're still in your childhood, but you did go to college and find people who were more like you, but you started to notice patterns, I think, that didn't really fit with the patterns you'd grown up with the systems thinking and the way that you'd understood people. And so I want to talk about that a bit, but first, what do you mean by this noticing and patterning is different than what I've been describing so far?
Yeah, and maybe it's not really the thing that we're talking about here. So I think as thinkers, as philosophers, we see patterns in the world. Like we can see the pattern that Western thinking has been very objectivist and individualistic and solipsistic and actually divisive. That's a pattern that we can see as philosophers. And I think we become able to do that by this kind of noticing that happens in loving relationships. I think actually, like I said before, like this, we grow out of relationship, and the relationship that we grow out of as we are born is, of course, we come out of one person who met another person. So there's always oneness and two-ness, and then out of that, these two people coming together, then a new person emerges. But it also physiologically, I think that's fascinating that there's oneness and two-ness, and how all loving beings who create, or sometimes not loving beings who create new beings. So yeah, noticing these patterns, but I think that come from sensorially noticing otherness and encountering otherness and being drawn to otherness, like this loving in that dialect. That means my body goes out to you, or my seeing, or my body, my noticing goes out to you, and I like it, I enjoy it, yeah, there's a relatedness between that, I think, between noticing these more abstract patterns and noticing the difference it makes when someone sees you and you can move differently. The differentiations that come out of that are what we do later on as well, more abstractly. And actually, maybe maybe it's relevant to mention, like in Spanish, the word gustar, se gusta, me gusta. Good is I like it, and it's super sensorial. It's the taste.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
What made you say that exactly?
Now this thinking about loving and the different expressions for it.
Yeah, bodily holding of some kind.
Yeah, and actually the Latin sapere from Homo sapien is also tasting, smelling, knowing, researching, all of that.
Yes,
whole
that's
realm.
sensuousness in a very different way than might be in a rom-com. So let's just think about you coming into knowing who you are and noticing your patterns, and that can happen through what we would just describe as this loving noticing. But then in a more academic context, for example, I think you started to notice that patterns, for example, such as that we might call the way that social cognition is studied. I guess it's more like we've represented the patterns then in books and in words and so on, and we can notice them in a different way. But I feel like you started to notice those weren't really, what's the word, describing or representing, I don't know, accurately this idea of relation or that we've been talking about. I'm trying to think about how you got into understanding this word participatory, because that's all this relation, and it's a different way of thinking about what happens in a social relationship when we compare it to the patterns of, I think, the way psychology or social cognition was studied when you went to university.
Yeah, actually, I can tell a story about that in a way. I was with my mom, who was a care worker for autistic children in families with autistic children, and I sometimes went on summer camps with her. I mean, day camps where these children were, and so I had and children sometimes came to our house that they were working with, and so on. And then I'd been fascinated by autism as a different way of thinking since my parents started working with autistic children. And we also talked about it like that, like what's going on for this child that they are having a meltdown, or that life is so difficult for them. What's going on for them, and how can we change it so that they can live better and be more fluently present in the world?
You talked about that when you, like, around the dinner table or something, just
Yeah. Like my dad would talk about what was going on at his work, and my mom too, and they would think together about what was going on and try to find solutions, right? So that they talked about that over dinner. And then I went to university. I knew I didn't want to study psychology because that's studying thinking over there. I wanted to study philosophy because that's doing the thinking, and I wanted to learn thinking or study it by doing it, right? So anyway, that's a small thing. But then I started looking at theories of autism. So how is autism understood? And the patterns that were noticed by psychology about autism and about social cognition were these, what looked to me, or maybe now it looks to me like that, but when I was studying that, I noticed that what I saw autistic children do wasn't at all represented in the theories I was reading, which were Anglo-Saxon or English-speaking, English language theories. And they didn't notice anything about the embodiment of autistic people, how autistic people are bodily present in the world, and how they move, and the fact that their behaviors were rhythmically different than from non-autistic people. It was all about theories in the head, theory of mind, and so on. And that seemed to me something that came more from psychology than from the autistic children. So psychology thought of this theory based on computational approach, and then applied that to autistic children without properly seeing them, in my view. And so I wrote like a little note and put it behind my computer at Sussex when I was studying for the PhD, rhythmic behavior, because rhythmic behavior was not at all seen by these theories of social cognition and of autism. Whereas what I know or knew from autistic children is that they engage in rhythmic behavior, and that seemed to be part of how they make sense of the world. And so autism wasn't really seen by psychology. What psychology was seeing, I thought, or maybe I see it now clearly like that, they were seeing this pattern that they had made, like a grid to put onto the world. And that was what remained most meaningful, rather than how the children actually were. And by that grid that psychological theory put on autistic people, they made it so that autistic people couldn't respond to them. And so they saw autistic people as not communicative and not social, which in part there is a disability in autism that is related to how to relate to the world, but it's not just that, and it's not fully determined by just that view that psychology put on autistic people, and thereby made it so that they couldn't communicate or couldn't interact well socially. And that's, I think, related to these pattern makings, and how pattern making can make sure that we overdetermine something or someone, and then they cannot respond back to us.
So we create representational, external, I mean, always external when I say representation, like through language we write down, or we create books, or we create curriculums to try to understand the patterns we have in common. And then somehow those patterns that we have in common become taken as the way things are or something. And it sounds like you had your lived experience was to put yourself in positions of different rhythms, and to understand that depending on, I mean, those conversations with your parents, it sounds to me like you're putting yourself in, swapping with another's position as much as you possibly can, and understanding that those rhythms then will dictate what the patterns mean in the world. And so when we learn, okay, these patterns are right, that doesn't fit with what you had learned as a kid. Does that make sense? And so you were looking at the academic representation, external, and it didn't fit with your actual lived experience.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe there's something more to it, that it wasn't just the autistic children that I knew but also having been myself in that kind of situation of not having been understood, which is also, of course, something that we all experience. But I think certain people in society don't experience that very much, or are kind of socialized to ignore that and to put it on the others as you are, um, like not right, and I need to change you, which rather than noticing, oh, actually, this is a two-way thing that's going on here, and we both have responsibility in changing things.
Yeah, but we try to hide what's different about us, or we learn very early to try to be more like whatever this external representation, it might even just be a movie or something, is telling us is somehow normal. Because this is all relation too in the way you've been describing. So it's all co-creating itself at the same time. And we take it as if it's the way it has to be, not realizing it is this relation.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, how I see it is you kind of, this is a little grandiose, but that you sort of came in and stood up, you and Ezekiel and others, of course. And there were Varela and Evan and a lot of others were doing it too. But you kind of stood up and said, there's other rhythms, there's other patterns that aren't being externally represented in this literature. Does that, I know that's a bit of a caricature, but did you kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to find some other way? This isn't satisfactory, I guess. And did it feel like that?
Yeah, I did feel like some things were needed, and I wanted to go there and see what was needed and work on it to make some things better, or to to put something where there wasn't something. Like, for instance, between so I was studying cognitive science at Sussex, and I was thinking or interested in social cognition. And from cognitive science, we think about the individual and individual brains and individual behavior. And at Sussex, individual embodiment, which was really cool to think about that and to be in the CCNR, the Center for Computational Neuroscience and Robotics, where they were making robots, and like thinking about embodiment through robots and so on. But it was very individualistic. And I thought we also have to think through sociology to understand intersubjectivity. And sociology was caricaturally mainly thinking about interaction, but cognitive science and sociology weren't really talking to each other much. And so there needed to be a bridge built there. And so I thought, okay, I actually did sort of design or think of participatory sense-making also to make that bridge between the cognitive sciences and the social sciences, because together they can really think about intersubjectivity. And so I think the concept was also, I made it explicitly for that, to build a bridge between those as well, because then we could understand intersubjectivity or think about it more fully than either of them individually could. And I think this applies to the fields of cognitive science as a field, or the cognitive sciences as a field, and sociology as a field. But within those fields, of course, thinkers like Bateson and like Turner and lots of different people have thought very sophisticatedly about intersubjectivity that bridges these things. But as fields, I think there needed to be more bridging, and I thought participatory sense-making could be a way to do that. Yeah.
Was it, I know it's hard to say what was motivating you, and I know you weren't using the word love, which is pretty unusual in these discourses back then, but it feels like it was motivated by love in the way that we've been describing it. I mean, I don't see you as of course, everyone wants to be successful in their academic world, but I feel a kind of uniqueness in you, and I'm sorry to put you in this position, but I wonder if you really were feeling motivated from that place that is love, to solve these things or to find a way to understand it better.
Yeah, I think that's a strange question in a way, because I mean, I think when you really think about things and you're really interested in them, that's what you do. Like you go for the problem and you want to investigate it. I like to think that I'm motivated by that, and I think I have been, and that's why the work has come out as it has. And I've taken some risks, but I've in my academic work, and and I've had the possibilities to do that as well, because I was in a mainly research position for a long time, where I wasn't really beholden to much about from my own work with my colleagues, which was wonderful. And so there's a whole different element of life to talk about there. But of course, it also matters to me that I am recognized through this work, right? That also has been motivating me, that I cannot ignore that, or that is a motivator. And actually, I regret that. I think I don't like it, but it's and this is one of the things that I find difficult about academic life, that we are made to care about that, and then it becomes something that we care about and that informs our day to day too much. I feel like that puts things on me that I really regret and resent. And yet I sometimes cannot stop from moving in those patterns, like checking your citations and things like that. But I actually really kind of hate it. But I can't stop doing it. And I wish we all didn't have to care about it, because it would be so much more free to do our work if we didn't have to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's part of what I'm trying to get at, which is very hard to speak about. But yeah, I mean, that's that holding that tension too. Of course, it wasn't just the motivation of the love or whatever, but
but
see,
that would be beautiful, but no.
but I feel that tension in the loving and knowing, and I feel that tension in the idea of participatory sense-making, and in the way that I imagine you've had to defend it, I guess, or I don't know. I think what I'm trying to get at is, when I read Loving and Knowing and a lot of your work, it makes me think of how much we've invested in the external representations and the patterns, so much so that we almost forgot why we're doing it or what it all means, or that there is this lit life, this is our life. And in the Loving and Knowing, when you talk about dementia, for example, you give these examples, or the digital world. To me, those feel like examples where we've started to mistake our external representations or our technology or whatever, our citations, whatever, these things, for all of it. And we forgot, it's almost as if we've just left behind 80% of our actual existence or something. Is this making any sense at all?
Yeah, I think so, because of the way we are made to interact, or we think we should interact, or we participate in the academic kind of world, or even just in a capitalist world. That's what it is, basically, I think. We take it as sustenance, how we are recognized by numbers of citations, or by, have I written my book yet? Or that person has so many more books, and how am I going to ever catch up? And we somehow take that as sustenance, and it feeds us, but it's the food that doesn't feed our soul. It feeds a kind of survival in the world that we live in. It's definitely a way of surviving, and it's a way of keeping living that is not at all to be discarded or looked down upon, because this is the structure of the world in which we live onward, that we participate in meeting more books, more citations, more recognition, more podcasts, more. Yeah, it's somehow adjacent to what the real work is, and yet also not. So it's actually in a conversation like this that we can be more free somehow to properly speak, or to speak more deeply. And that is in a way also fed by us, both of us, having been able to do that. We have done within the structures that we work in, that allow us now to be here and have seen each other in a way, right? Or have come across each other's work. And so those things also interplay with each other in complex ways. And it's just the world that we live in. So to pretend like it's not there, or to pretend like we could ignore it, like all the CV stuff, or the whatever you want to call it. No, we also live in that, and we have to deal with it. And I think it's a matter of being a bit judicious with it, as much as we can, but also not to be overly worried about that, because then that becomes another difficulty in a way, like trying to be, oh my God, I can't look at my citation because it's not a good food for my soul. That's then another kind of making it more difficult.
Yeah. This tension is so potent. I've heard so many people thinking about academia lately in a way that feels urgent. I mean, from both sides, of course, it's under threat in a way, the funding and stuff, and we want to defend that. And then on the other side, it does feel like a lot of people are sort of miserable because they've just given themselves over to this external representation world, which you can never win. I mean, there's always going to be someone with more. And it's not even only that, it's more that disconnect between understanding, loving, and knowing as a manifestation of this, what we're calling oneness, but is this process. That disconnect is eating a lot of people. And I mean, just what you said, like being able to hold that, being able to understand, being able to say, oh, I'm looking at my citations as if it matters, or, being able to hold that space itself is already something that could be helpful, just to go back to that theme of noticing or awareness, or even having one another hold that space for each other.
Yeah, I think that's crucial to hold the space for and with each other, to talk with each other and to be together in this, or to work together. And yeah, which is also something that is difficult, right? Because working together is, in a competitive world, it's fraught with danger. Yeah, and that's part of it.
I mean, if holding the tension became more normal, new systems would have to be created, right? Because right now we're locked into these ruts that are either or rut. You either are winning or losing. And actually, that's not the only way that we have to be in the world, is it? I mean, aren't you trying to open up a different space, even dealing with all this tension? And of course, it's not like you're immune from it, but do you see that we could create systems that aren't so alienating in this way?
Yeah, but I'm really curious how, though. I don't really know. So I don't know if to talk about this, but I'm not in an academic position anymore. And I was out of work for a year, and I was also ill, and that was really tough. But now I have income again. It's temporary, and it's which before I had a tenured position, right? So that was nice to be tenured and to have that security, but not wanting to be in the place where I was, and actually having another place to be, which was totally separate from where I was, a very good place to be, like namely here in Canada with my husband and my family. And also needing more freedom for my work than I had before, even though I had a lot in the way I came through the academic career. Yeah, I kind of lost the.
Well, if you'd like to talk about that a bit, because I know you're not in academia anymore, but you are. I mean, in a way, the world is changing very quickly, such that you are a philosopher of cognitive science and academic, even though you might not be affiliated with the university. I didn't know you'd been sick. I'm sorry. And that sounds like a lot, and it sounds very connected to these themes. So I guess does it connect to any of the other stuff we were talking about in the sense of these spaces being held and noticing and tension and
yeah, of course it totally connects, but how to talk about it, I don't really know very well, because it's vulnerable at the same time as it's also interesting. Like I'm curious how it will go in the world, and in terms of, I wish we could all open up more spaces to be following the questions that we want to ask, and have capacity for that in a wide sense of our livelihood not being threatened by not being in an academic position, for instance. But yeah, how to do that? I think like being independent scholars, or interdependent, I think is a better way to put it. How do we do that? I don't know. There are some people that I see writing newsletters and subsisting on subscriptions, or on what people give to read the newsletter, for instance. I wonder, I think for some things that's a good idea, but I also wonder about how we have to do that in order to sustain that, because I think a lot of that is writing in a way to market your experience somehow, and that is really something I don't want to go towards. That hurts just thinking about it. I mean, that's not right. I think that's like unless you really want to do that and that's your thing and you enjoy that and you thrive in that, and people are interested in reading it and there is a connection like that, then fine. But I don't think we should have to do something like that in order to. But yeah, where to? Well, I think universal basic income is the way to go. But although it's so hard to implement because people who are against it just say that it doesn't work, and people become lazy, even though it's been proven time and time again that that's not the case, and that actually people will work and do the proper work, the deep work that people want to do as living sense-making creatures, as interested and motivated and loving the words. They want to work on the things that fascinate them, and these are so widely different for everyone. That I think in your situation, what do you do?
You know, I've always resisted traditional ways of being. Constraints are good, but I've always known I need to spread out into spaces that aren't the spaces that one must fit in order to go a traditional route. If in a way I've come to a place now where I could probably handle it, but you know, as a young person, I knew I had to just find a way to do it otherwise, which I did. But I think and I did it through, like, for example, working in issues of transportation, which actually connect very much to my philosophical ideas, but I could, you know, do it in a way that makes money and still do the philosophy. So I had to be very creative, but that was really for survival, to be very honest, just for my health.
Yeah.
But I think where I'm connecting here, like precariousness, you brought up disruption. You brought up Hans Jonas and this precarious idea, and I think where I see hope is in us as humans realizing I really see it as understanding ourselves differently and what life is differently. And I think it very much connects to participatory sense-making, to way-making, to especially to loving and knowing, to being able to plug in, reconnect, to love and let that motivate us and let that be okay. And I feel like I wanted to ask you, what kind of pushback did you get with using this word love? Because one thing you do hold the tension very well, and you have, at least from my perspective, found a way to talk about all of these things that can be still robust and grounded. But I wonder, when you started talking about love, did you get any pushback on that, or even the participatory sense-making and stuff? Is there something in that tension that's taught you something of how to hold this space in a way that can make sense to more people and not turn them off because it's, you know, the woo factor or something like that?
Yeah. So there are different things to say about that. One thing that did happen early on, when I was working on participatory sense-making, was that some people started to give pushback against it and sort of, they sort of started to attack me rather than the theory, even in writing. And I was asked to review a paper in which somebody was doing that, and then I thought, this is really strange. I mean, how did it get past the editor even? But anyway, so that was one thing. But then one thing I learned from that that individual situation of that paper, and also from working in the enactive tradition, which gets a lot of pushback as well, or people ask to answer for an action to answer cognitivist questions. So enactivists were asked in the beginning, what do you think about representations, and why don't representations exist? And then you have to answer that, but it's a cognitivist question, and in the enactive framework, it actually doesn't. It's not applicable because, there's a lot to say, and
it's like what you said about the autism, right? It's like asking an autistic person to discuss the rhythm of whatever the normal, so-called normal.
Yeah, totally. And so the way I found to work with that is to ignore it and to say, sorry, no, I cannot answer that question. And by the way, there are other people answering this question with analytic argumentation and so on, and go there and look at that, and that's good. but I need to do the work here in the enactive approach and stay here and work there and deepen that, because that's where my answers are for what I'm interested in. And so be like, okay, no, sorry, that's not, I don't feel called to necessarily have to respond to that. Good question or within your framework, but I'm doing work here, and stay with that. And that's hard sometimes, but also sometimes it's nice because I stay with my thing. And there's also an element, of course, of doing this work, which is that there is just too much to answer, or there's too much coming at us all the time, and we have to do that anyway, whether it's something that we're not interested in or even things we are interested in and should be done. And I feel like, yes, I wish I had time and I could do that, but I can't. Sorry, I need to do this other thing. And I'm very responsive to people too much, so that I do lose track of my own thing. It's not that I'm very doggedly happy to do my own thing. I wish it was more like that, because there is a lot always coming in and lots of interesting things, and I do go off track and or do work on different tracks, which is also part of the work. And yeah,
It's just too overwhelming. You can't take all of it in and know all of it, so everyone has to kind of find their path.
Yeah.
But I think for you it's a bit different because you were co-creating a different way of thinking about cognition. So it's not that you just found a path. Of course you had a lot of people you're walking,
yeah,
you know, with or behind or whatever you want to say, but you're also kind of trying to create that, and to just give your language over to the language of this other thing would have been a waste of time, I think.
yeah, and that's really important. So the people that I work with, like Ezekiel and Elena Kufari and other people, I think that's so to have the conversations when we already understand the language and we are working in it, and you know, so those are like the people, yeah, with whom I feel that we do speak the same language as we are inventing it as well, or moving it forward from what came before us, from the people who came before us as well. That is really crucial in maintaining it as well. So there are different dialogue partners that we all have, and different communities that we speak in and that we speak with, and all of that. I also find it so fascinating at how we move around in the world and speak our language here, and then we speak our language there, and with another person. And
Yeah,
just
we're all multiplicities in a way, and I think that actually relates a lot to what we were talking about of trying to hold all these things, because even as I'm agreeing with you that I think it's right what you described, and that was what you had to do in that moment, is because you were building participatory sense-making, which is now something we can all talk about because it has these patterns, right? But that doesn't stop. So now, for example, me, I find it very interesting to be inspired by participatory sense-making and all those texts, and at the same time to kind of look at computationalism and start to understand that those don't have to cancel each other out necessarily. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but there can be ways to hold these things. But because you did all the work and the patterns are recognizable, they're still in dialogue and alive and changing everything, even, you know, language of thought or something. And so from another perspective, you taking care of that autopoietic system, being it all together, gave it life, and it's now, you know, in life with other systems. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's well described. Yeah. And so, and all of that is developing. And yeah, I do think that when you develop something more in depth, then it can be in dialogue again. And that's needed. I think that's also one of the things that's needed in the world right now, that we listen more to each other and let each other be ourselves as well. And this is something I've learned from listening to and reading Indigenous scholars here in Canada. I think that's one of the things that they are calling for, not to be called upon to give answers immediately. And maybe they don't want to always respond to that, and they stay on their own ground. Actually, I learned that from following some Indigenous scholars. Like, I mean, it came a bit later, but like seeing that they stay with the work that they are doing and don't always respond, and then doing that work, and actually by just doing that and not responding, creating like a call for others to listen or to stay in conversation while nothing is necessarily being said to you. There is some work going on, and then later on maybe there is dialogue, while each of us works out our thing. And I think that's a principle of participatory sense-making, that we, each of us, individuals or groups or ways of knowing, stay with our way of knowing or our individuality or our sense-making enough so that it remains a thing in the world that can then, when it's a little more developed, interact with other ways of knowing. And then new things can happen again. And that might be language of thought, that might be computational approaches, that might be an approach to processing in the brain. And that's important also to understand with participatory sense-making and the interactive brain hypothesis. And all those things then can dialogue with each other, but this inner work is also needed. So dialogue can take away from the inner work, and or the interaction can suck up all the inner work, and then it's not an interaction anymore because the inner work or the self-maintenance or the individual sense-making isn't there anymore, and then it's not a social interaction anymore. So it's a principle of participatory sense-making that this is what happens and what needs to continue to happen. Like work on all these levels.
It reminds me again of your mom holding the space or your dad holding the space, or I think later in life you probably held the space for your dad in different ways through what you learned with participatory sense-making. But maybe also we can do that for each other as academics or just as people who are really trying to understand what this is, what thinking is, what life is. I mean, that these questions matter to us and have mattered since we were kids. And maybe if we can connect through that intention, which is when we aren't worried about our credentials and judging each other. I do feel like that's connected to what you were talking about with the indigenous holding the space or the silence or the listening, which is actually a very active, alive place. It's not passive at all. You describe that too with loving. It's not neutral. It's not some kind of neutral, passive thing. It's actually even more alive, or somehow more potential comes in. Then the space opens, and actually what looked like a binary of either academia or not can become a multiplicity too, in a similar way, can't it? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, that it was needed to be maybe apart from it to quite an extent. And even now, here, I mean, before our conversation, I walked by the trees that we have here. So I go and say hello to the trees in the morning. And that's really like a way, it's a kind of inner work in place. Like, this is what's going on here. Here the trees are living, and I'm here, and we, and I think that work in place with ourselves and our understanding to then dialogue, both are equiprimordially there and needed.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the trees, because I was having a bit of a stressful day just in terms of kind of what we talked about, like knowing I need to finish these book projects and kind of being frustrated with myself and I went outside and my dog was kind of taking a while, and I was like, but then I was so thankful because I just looked up and I was like kind of overwhelmed by how beautiful it was, just the trees and these kind of crazy wildflowers, and it just got me. It was like, got my attention, and it did kind of that, what you were describing of just calming down, opening the space. And if we, that's kind of metaphorical to think we can do that in our academic life, but I think we can. And I think we do start to understand things aren't so binary. Actually, there's all these other possibilities that we just couldn't see when we were stuck in that one mindset, right? Has that happened for you at all? Or are you starting to get a little bit of a sense of that? Almost like the world changes, like it did for me this morning. Suddenly it was rich and multidimensional again, instead of just me stuck in my head, worried about this.
Yeah, that happens. And it's, of course, but I'm trying by living here where I am now to make that the starting point. And then to live from there into my work, or into, the more admin or the more, having to do this and that element of my work. And I'm lucky to be here where I am, to be able to do that, in the situation that I am in now. But it took me a long way. It wasn't easy to get here. It's still not easy to be here. All of that. That's a whole different thing to talk about. But when we all move through, ease, and then difficulty, and then ease again, or all of it at the same time, always, yeah. But to just be able to maybe accept that or move through that, and then indeed open up to the world, or the world knocks on you and goes like, hey, look at the flowers. Yeah.
And you kind of realize, even what like the word flower doesn't do justice. It's just this kind of opening of you don't really know what you are or what all of this is, and that's wonderful. Again,
Yeah.
before we go, I wonder about your experience of love, and if there's anything you would like to share, anything that comes up relative to all these things that you would like to share about love.
Mm. Yeah, maybe just that there are very many different ways of relating, and that there are many different layers to a relationship, and some can keep existing even while others disappear, which is what happened with my father. He had dementia, or got dementia, and then of course we started losing him in a way before he died, and he lost himself in a way, and that's difficult, and yeah, and that was a whole trajectory that's really tough. But again, the way dementia is conceived of in society, or by medical science, as the loss of personality, the loss of emotional skill, and so on. Actually, when you are with a person that you love and that is losing capacities, there are other things that are maintained, which we maybe aren't always taught to still see by medical guidelines. Like, for instance, this person is going to lose their connection because he loses emotional capacities. But actually, I noticed that my father remained very emotionally sensitive to the way people were relating with him. Especially, most strikingly to me was that he was very sensitive to how people related to him and reacted to that very accurately, even when he has lost his way of his speech. And so and this goes for all loving relationships and all knowing relationships, I think, as well, since I think they're the same, that we know certain things and we don't know other things. And this is also itself not something that's fixed, that changes. The thing that you didn't know might become something that you are getting to know through relating, through changing and becoming different with each other as you relate and as you each develop.
That's that kaleidoscopic multiplicity thing again. These multiplicities open up, these kaleidoscopic ways, and your father lost the external representations, right, or the access to something like language, or in a certain sense. And I guess we would assume, that means that somehow means he's lost something about the way he's experiencing the world. But that just shows me how important this work is, in a way, because it's a completely different way of understanding any kind of illness if we understand it as a turn of the kaleidoscope that we have to try to figure out, rather than a diminishment of capacity, full capacity.
Yeah, and maybe even more. So, what I wanted to say is that so my father lost ways of understanding the world and ways to fit the structure of the world with how he did things. Like, he lost the capacity to eat with knife and fork because it seemed somehow that these implements were doing different things for him, and he used the knife like a fork and the fork like a knife, and the structure of the world fell apart in some way. But it wasn't. I mean, he was still able to eat and to, in a way that didn't look polite anymore. And and he was such an intelligent, sensitive person with lots of integrity all the time. So that's but all of those things at the same time are going on. And I think also really important in that is not just to put yourself in the shoes of the other. But it's also being the other from the point of view of the other. Like you're also different from the other people, from everyone else, right? So being the othered person, having been the othered person in different situations, or seeing yourself as, oh, this other person sees me as different and experiences me as different. I'm the other. I think that's an element of it also that's important. Like, yeah. Yeah, so but indigenous scholars, I think, taught me is that I'm the other. in that really, I'm coming in with certain preconceptions that are actually different. And that, I need to look at that and be like, oh, how am I engaging in reading Indigenous scholars and so on? Not just, oh, this is interesting. It's a different way of looking at the world that they have, and I find it interesting and look for something there. But also, I'm coming here with a certain way of looking things. How can I be careful with that as I enter in this situation?
I think that's the real hard thing to figure out how to do and how to let each other do.
Yeah, that's important to that.
Yeah, why is that hard? We want to defend something, or yeah, I think it gets back to that overdetermining, underdetermining, and the tension of just, in a loving relationship, as you describe it, in loving and knowing, how we're constantly trying not to lose ourselves and kind of also want to lose ourselves. And how do we do that?
Yeah, I think just playing with it. Just play with it.
Yeah,
And
feeling safe enough to.
yeah, and then help each other be safe, or and if it's not safe, deal with the unsafety, or recognize, oh, this is unsafe. Why is that? And what can we do to change it? Or is this unsafety teaching us something or leading us somewhere? Or why is it unsafe? And what would really change that? Or what would only superficially change the unsafety? Are we able to really build safety for everyone? Or is that sometimes impossible because we really believe opposite things? And what do we do then? Do we make it safe, or do we go with the oppositeness of things and work forward from that? Because sometimes making things safe is a danger in itself. But because then one side is over determining the other, maybe, or right. So making it safe or making it good isn't, I don't think, necessarily always the best thing.
Yeah, that's again that how do we hold both at once, which would be a place where we actually don't have the same understanding of self that we have now, or of where life begins and ends. It almost really requires a shift at a level that is very hard for us to even imagine.
Yeah, but I think it's called for now in the world.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to do it almost desperately.
Yeah, we're being made to do it, or yeah. And we should be careful not to focus only on the West and how things are going in the West or in the US when we do that, because there's so much else going on in the world, and in the global South and in the East, people are doing things differently. And that's important to see and to relate to, and not only to relate to what comes out of the US and what right? I mean, yeah, because that can become too determining of our imagination if we're not careful.
Yes, but and then it can also become too overwhelming to try to hold everything at once. So it's again that understanding there's so much more than we can ever hold, and trying to hold as much as we can, and helping each other, and understanding, like there's two things that keep coming up that I just want to say before we go. And one is that understanding we have no idea what we're capable of, actually. Like we were talking about sensory capacity and what love is in terms of like, I'm holding you and your body. That's actually, we don't even know the capacities of what that could be, right? Like there's not a cap on that.
That's an interesting thing to say as well. Like there's not a cap on it, and maybe one thing about love that's important, I think, is that it's not a scarcity thing. It's not less. The more you love, it's more. It makes more, and it's because you're continually in relation, and it'll be difficult, unavoidably, and that's part of it. But it's not something that there is a scarcity of ever.
Exactly. I think that gets missed somehow, that people almost think, you're trying to be a good person, but actually this is a really deep opening into a very exciting way of being alive that we haven't explored. There's something very, very sensory and exciting about it. It's not just like, let's be a good person. There's a portal here, but it's very uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, and it involves risk. It is a risk, actually. And it is exciting. And, there's thrill in risk. I think also we maybe think that because the world seems dangerous and is actually dangerous in different places for different people, very much so. But, this danger is part of life also, right? It's detrimental and destructive, but it's also part of life. And there is a life force that deals with the darkness, that is in connection with destruction directly.
When I was reading your piece, I was thinking of how hard it is sometimes to love someone, who it's actually, for me at least, quite painful. And I don't mean it's hard, like I have to work to love them, because love is the relation, I think. But it's just hard to hold that space and like actually feel how much I love someone, because you can't make things better for them if they're sick or something, or you can't, whatever, it's just kind of painful. And there's something about that when I was reading your work, just understanding that as a form of knowledge too, or being able to kind of switch the kaleidoscope and understand we're learning how to hold more, and that's part of that portal.
Yeah. There is a Canadian philosopher, Kim McLaren, who talks about ontological intimacy and how we unavoidably always transgress each other ontologically and in real life, of course. And that speaks to that as well.
Is that for the letting be too that's in the paper? Is that the same?
Yeah. Letting be. And then she has another paper in Puncta, what's the full title of the journal? I don't remember, but it's about ontological intimacy. Anyway, that speaks to that. Just
well, thank you so much, and thank you for your work, and I appreciate what you're doing and who you are. So,
okay.
All right, well, have a beautiful day there.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.